In the mid-2nd century BC, Rome had just managed to defeat its greatest threat, Carthage. Since then, the Republic had enjoyed a brief period of peace without war. However, when it seemed that the external threat had been defeated, a new threat began to emerge within its borders. This was none other than the Slave Rebellion. Although the most famous rebellion was led by Spartacus, in total, there were 3 known uprisings known as the Servile Wars. The first of these rebellions began in 135 BC, just a few decades after the Romans had conquered most of Sicily after the First Punic War. Prior to this, Rome had conquered the Italian peninsula, and the locals, known as the Socii, enjoyed great autonomy. This meant that they were not required to pay tribute to the Republic, and although they contributed troops to Rome, they were treated as preferred allies. However, the situation was very different in Sicily, which had recently become a Roman province, and was a region with great wealth due to its fertile lands and ideal location. The Romans therefore imposed a new provincial government system on the island, which meant that there would be a governor and substantial tribute collection. It is worth remembering that the previous owner of the island was Carthage, and after the war between the two powers, Rome began to confiscate the lands of Carthaginian sympathizers. As a result, many Roman investors were attracted by the purchase of this fertile and cheap land, acquiring large areas and starting to establish properties. This in turn caused a massive boom in slavery, and a large number of slaves from all over the Mediterranean were brought to Sicily to work on the new farms. However, conditions were deplorable, as many landowners did not bother to feed or dress the slaves adequately. On many occasions, the slaves were forced to loot or steal to survive. The situation apparently concerned the senators of Rome, but as the lands of Sicily were in the hands of powerful elites with judicial powers, every time there were charges against the landowners, the matter came to nothing. With the Senate tied up, it was only a matter of time before a group of slaves finally rose up against their masters, which finally happened in 135 BC. The slaves of the city of Henna were particularly mistreated, and when they conspired to finally rebel, they turned to a slave named Juno as their leader. Juno was said to be a particularly special slave because he was reputed to be a wizard, capable of making prophecies. One of his divine revelations was that the slave revolt would be successful in capturing the city of Henna. The revolt therefore began when 400 of these inspired slaves, inspired by Juno's prophecy, rose up and took the lives of their masters, along with their wives and children, gathering other slaves from throughout the city to their cause. The revolt was brutal, and the rebels quickly took the lives of all the wealthy men in the city, except for those who could forge weapons. The slaves themselves then chained these men up and forced them to work making weapons for their cause. Juno then proclaimed himself king and took the name Antiochus in honor of the famous Seleucid king. He quickly gathered and armed a force of 6,000 decently armed slaves, many of whom had been forced into a life of banditry by their masters and thus had experience fighting. With this small but formidable army, Juno began to devastate the surrounding fields and recruit even more men to the cause, eventually numbering around 10,000. The Romans, meanwhile, attempted to put down the revolt, but unaware of the severity of the situation, they sent only small forces to deal with the situation, which were quickly defeated by the rebels. To make matters worse, another group of slaves in Sicily also rose up, this time led by a notorious bandit named Cleon. Upon hearing this, the Romans were initially joyful, thinking that both factions would fight against each other and destroy themselves. However, when Leon joined one side and added another 5,000 men to their cause, acting as their general, the formidable slave force marched towards Arragas and easily took control of the city. Things seemed to be going well for one side, so much so that even many free men from the lower classes joined their cause, further increasing their numbers. After a month of camping out, Rome sent Praetor Lucius and Piso at the head of 8,000 Sicilian militiamen to confront the revolt. But considering that Juno and Cleon had 20,000 men under their command, it seemed that Rome was aware of the seriousness of the matter. Evidently, the 8,000-man militia was crushed by the slaves and the revolt grew even larger in Sicily. Moreover, the Roman disaster was multiplied by 3 as 3 more Roman praetors with similar-sized forces were defeated one by one. Time passed, and by the year 133 BC, the revolt was still strong, with the number of slaves reaching 60,000 and the rebels controlling the majority of the island's populations. But Rome finally decided to act with force, sending an army led by Consul Lucius Piso. Under his command, Rome achieved its first significant successes, killing 8,000 slaves in battle and crucifying those who had been taken prisoner. The following year, another consul, Publius Rupilius, was also sent to the island. Rupilius launched a ruthless campaign to finally quell the rebellion. First, he took the city of Taormina, forcing the rebels from the interior to retreat to the isthmus. Finally, a rebel slave named Serapion betrayed the rebellion by opening the gates to the Romans, who violently stormed the city, and the hungry rebels, who were unable to fight, quickly surrendered. Rupilio, far from being benevolent, ordered that all slaves be gathered, tortured, and then thrown off a cliff. He then marched to the rebel fort of Henna where Leon was stationed, and once again he besieged the city. Realizing that he would soon face the same fate as the others, Cleon decided to go out and fight, preferring to die in battle rather than from hunger within the walls. The morale of the rebels was broken when they saw their leader fall, and once again they were betrayed and the Romans took the city. Upon hearing of the fall of Henna and the fate of Leon, Juno fled with 1,000 men to the mountains. At this point, the rebels knew they were defeated, and Rupilio's ruthless tactics had worked to break the rebel morale. The few who remained with Juno knew that Rupilio would soon march against them. In a desperate act, the slaves decided to end their own lives instead of being captured by Rupilio. When the Roman consul finally arrived in the mountains, he found one with a few close friends hiding in a cave. The slave leader was arrested and finally lost his life to an illness in prison. The First Servile War had ended. Until then, it had been the largest slave revolt the Roman world had ever seen, but it was only the first of 3, each more ferocious. If you liked this video, you can leave a like to let me know, and if you're not subscribed, I recommend that you do so because I will continue to upload content like this. Thanks to all members who support this channel and make it possible for me to keep going. See you in the next video.